patient audience and going through a long, long day. And you have all been punctual at 10 and we're here till virtually the end. Speaking of legal, when law was very different back then, one of the earliest things we learned was humor in law. And even back then, we had these stories about a lawyer falling off a ship and a shark not gobbling him up because, professional ethics, they don't eat each other and all that. So, and one of the other jokes I remember, and what was told to us was that bichara, some NGOs called up a big law firm and said that, I have 3 very simple questions, and how much would you charge? And the law firm said, 1,00,000 rupees. So he asked, I think that's a bit too much, isn't it? Saying, yes, it's too much. What's your 3rd question? And when I heard all those things, I said, this isn't what CAP is going to be. And many of you know that when you send your queries, sometimes you send one simple one, sometimes you send like a basket full of queries. Sometimes you send query after query after query. We patiently answer that. I think we have been reasonable in our fees and offering. But what has changed since we started was earlier it was just trust law, charity law, income tax, FCRA, but now there's a full robust offering of labor laws, VAT, service tax, and a whole bunch of other things. And that's the metamorphosis. So, Mayor can probably tell you more.
I'm just going to end it with one line. And it's written behind here, CAP is now Complaince-Complete. And as Naushir said, thank you very, very much for being a wonderful audience. Because from the morning, and we were very pleasantly surprised to see everybody was on time. Thank you very, very much, because I know everybody will run as soon as the session is over. So I'm going to hand it over to Behram. Okay? Thank you very much.
Oh, but don't run, there's dinner. Right, Behram, over to you.
Thanks a lot. So I have an impossible task because following up on Mayor's fabulous choir is absolutely impossible. And to add to that, Mayor told me, please make it fun. I don't know how you make this fun. And she's not even listening to me, but at least we started with the jokes. The good news I have for you is I promise that we will not go on for an hour and 15 minutes. Allotted time, we will definitely finish before that unless you have a lot of questions. Let's make the last session as interactive as possible. I think you all have had a very long day and have been very patient. Thank you so much for that. So with that, I'll request each member to introduce themselves. And the idea is also to have a little bit of debate and fun. So we will first say a few words, and thereafter we'll make it whether the 2 questions for the debate is it tougher to be compliant for a corporate or an NGO? And the second one is, who does a better job at compliance?
Introduction first. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Gaurang Mehta. I started out with corporate career in late 70s, seems long back now. And with Iron Exchange, Johnson & Johnson, Knight Frank, and companies like that. Switched over to my own NGO, which was in the child adoption advocacy space. And for the last 7 years, I am working with Magic Bus as a legal head. Should I make the opening statement? Please. Gotcha. Okay, talking about the compliances, we regard compliances to be of 2 nature, external and internal. External, obviously, one of it being statutory, which are mandatory, we have to do it. And the other side is also contractual with the funders, which is equally important, if not less. And the other side is the internal compliances, which would be in terms of various policies like child protection policies, if one has it, prevention of sexual harassment policy at workplace, conflict resolution, and etc. So both these things are very important. But before that, what I would like to add here is that compliance is something which depends a lot on the attitude of the top management of the wherever you're working. If they are serious, if the top management is serious about it, it percolates down the line, and everybody is conscious about it. And at Magic Buzz, we are fortunate that that is the case. We'll talk more about it as we go along.
Hi, my name is Richa Roy. I'm a lawyer with AZB and Partners. I'm primarily a banking and finance lawyer, but I do a lot of work in the NGO space as well. We advise not-for-profits, social enterprises, etc. And hopefully that keeps us from being sharks. And that is one space where we don't charge by the hour and for each question that we're asked. And therefore, I think I'm well placed to be on the side of the debate where I say that compliance is harder for not-for-profits because I think the laws for them are a little harder to comply with. The external environment for them is also a little harder. So that's the side of the debate I'm on, and look forward to debating this with the others.
Hello, my name is Urvashi Devitayal, and I work for the Thomson Reuters Foundation. We work primarily on a program called Trust Law, where we get law firms to do pro bono work for NGOs and social enterprises. So currently we work with about 500 plus law firms around the world. We work with about 50 plus law firms in India who generously donate a lot of their time to help NGOs and social enterprises with compliance work. I have to say AZB has been one of our very strong partners in this program and have helped out a lot of NGOs through our work. I think I wanted to give two examples of organizations that have used, have been compliant and done well with it. I mean, one of the organizations was a small organization working out of Dharavi that asked us to get help on drafting a child protection policy. And just by having that child protection policy on their website, they were able to be far more attractive to funders and leverage it to get a big grant. So it can be used in many different ways. The other example I actually wanted to give was an organization that wasn't actually as good with their compliance work. And one of the things that people don't really look at, and it's a little bit of a larger thing, but it's about intellectual property. And they didn't look at about protecting their brand name. And there was an organization in the US which actually used the brand name in India to raise funds in the US using their same NGO's name. And so there was a lot of sort of issues that come up like this that organizations don't foresee. So one of the things that we talk to organizations a lot about is using your board members and using other sort of corporate volunteers to understand the issues that can come up. So yeah, that's it.
My name is Akhil Shahani, and I wear a few hats, and that's probably because my wife thinks I've got a very big head. So let's talk about the first hat. My first hat is that my group, the Shahani group of colleges, we run a range of colleges in management, media, entrepreneurship, real estate, and others. I'm also part of a private equity fund that invests in education called Kaizen, and we do a lot of work in the education sector. My non-profit hat, I'm on the board of an incubator called Unlimited that supports startup social entrepreneurs, and we do work there. And of course, we have a family foundation that's been running for the last 60 years, a classic grandfather started and moved on. Since Naushir started off with a legal joke, I thought let me just share an actual legal joke of which happened to a friend of mine. A good friend of mine, he was one of the probably the most active playboys I know before marriage. Like this was when we were growing up in our misspent youth. And, he had a good time. For some strange reason, when he got married, he chose to get married to a lady who was into marriage law, a divorce lawyer. Suddenly, I've seen this guy is probably the best paid husband ever. He's nice to his wife, giving her roses. And my wife actually looks at him and says, why can't you be more like him? So when I think of compliance, I think, is it because his intrinsic personality has changed, or is it because who's actually on his case? So that's what view of compliance. But anyway, talking about the corporate and the NGO debate about compliance, and again, we're probably going to get into it, but I thought let's just make a stand here, is that you can't really make a blanket statement, because the thing is, when you look at the corporate world, it's like saying that in the for-profit space, you have the Panwala. I mean, he earns money, he's for-profit, and you have, the Infosys and, the huge companies. all of them will have a different level of compliance. The same way you will have in the non-profit space, you will have, like, let's say, the Tata Trusts or multinational NGOs or some very good compliance NGOs here. You also have on some of the other sides, maybe some trusts which are less oversight, maybe a religious trust, or let's say a trust in a tier 2, tier 3 town. So each of them really are compliant, really based on, let's say, the person heading it in terms of what the driving need of the person who's heading it is, and also how much oversight they have, like my friend with his divorce lawyer wife. So again, let's have a great debate and let's talk about different types of for-profits and non-profits and see what works.
Thanks a lot. So I think it's pretty clear by now that on the left is the NGO side and on the right is the corporate side. And I think just to highlight a few points that have been made, one is that we keep telling every client, whether it's a corporate NGO, that compliance should be taken very seriously. It should not be tick the box. And it is very much top down. But the reason you take it seriously is, one, a stitch in time really saves 9. And there are endless examples of that. However small you may be, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's, in terms of bandwidth, it's very difficult for a small for-profit or not-for-profit. But it comes back to bite you. So even if you're a startup and you don't take it seriously because you don't have either the resources or the bandwidth, at some point in today's environment, as Naushad said, given the plethora of laws, it will come back to cost you heavily. So you really don't have a choice. So as you're going to spend the time, money, and effort, do it in a proper way. Don't do it in a tick-the-box way. Do it like this guy with the wife overseeing. I mean, pretend that you have this virtual wife. And take it seriously because it is well worth your time. So may I start with you? So the two questions, is it more difficult for an NGO and do they do it better?
I am suddenly reminded of this lovely choir group which sang the last song, "Ae dil hai mushkil jeena yahan, jara bach ke jara hat ke yahan compliance hai meri jaan." Because whether it's corporate or NGOs, life is difficult. But yes, probably for NGOs it is more difficult for 2-3 reasons. One is that, as Behram mentioned, the bandwidth. No matter how successful or growing an organization may be, which Magic Bus is, there is always a very tight, it is always tightly staffed. It doesn't really have too many people to run around and make things happen and all those things. Even when you are on the absolutely right side of the law. And secondly, some methodologies may come which may come naturally to corporate sector, which may are not to, I mean, as NGOs we would be able to do that, do some of those things. So to that extent, yes, it is more difficult. But in recent times, I have observed things are sort of becoming with more organized and with organizations like CAP advising and all that. So down north also there are a couple of organizations. Things are becoming a bit easier because there is someone to guide all the time, and things are looking up.
So I'm just going to, because this is a debate, I have to sort of argue that point, Gaurang. Yeah. And I think NGOs just choose not to believe that they should be compliant. I think there's more than enough resources available for them. There is a number of corporate volunteers that you can leverage to work with you to get compliant. If you don't have the time, get a corporate volunteer on board, give them a list of things to do and tell them to get the work done. There's more than enough resources also available. There's programs like ours. We're not the only program. We worked on 2,000 plus projects across the world. We've saved organizations about $35 million in terms of pro bono support. There's also organizations like CAP that are there to work with you. It's a question of will.
I fully agree. What I meant was the day-to-day kind of a stuff. No. I must publicly share, express my gratitude to a lady who is on our board. I'm sure Behram must be knowing Shaneen Parikh. She's a partner with Cyril Amarchand. And a phenomenal amount of pro bono work is being done by them. So we do get that support, there is no doubt about it. But what I meant was that there's many times small issues, like for example, banks are always acting funny where FCRA money is concerned. I mean, the queries galore, including the shareholding patterns of the funders and this and that and whatnot. So those times things become a bit ticklish.
Let me just buttress my side of the debate a little bit. In some ways, I'm just going to echo what has already been said. The corporate world and the social sector are sort of mirror images of each other when it comes to compliance. Neither of them give it much importance until something really sort of blows up in their face and they realize, okay, this is something we really need to invest in. But that said, I mean, how hard it is for NGOs is something that was driven home to me when one of our favorite clients, who runs this wonderful not-for-profit microfinance organization in some of the hardest parts of India, UP and Bihar, said, why is it so difficult to do good in India? And it's true, it's actually really difficult to do good in India because the laws and regulations around that are extremely difficult. And the theme for the last 2 years, since this new government has come into power, has been ease of doing business. And there have been a sort of plethora of initiatives that the government has taken to make it easier for businesses to function and to carry out their business much more easily. But they've actually made, it's actually much harder for NGOs to function. It is hard enough for them to function, but it's become harder and harder over the past couple of years. And my favorite example is, it's very easy to get FDI into India. There are some sectors which are, difficult, and there are several conditionalities that go with it. But it's just near impossible to get foreign funding into a not-for-profit. And it's becoming harder and harder as time goes by. And one other favorite example of mine is I work with Naushir and CAP on putting together a legal audit checklist. And it ran into about 35-40 pages. And that was just the compliance that you have to do as the form of your organization and based on the kind of funding you take. We didn't even get into the nitty-gritties of the kind of activity that you carry out and what sort of specialized compliance that you would additionally need to do for that. I do due diligence checklist for companies that have to do compliance as well, and I can assure you they're much shorter. So I think it is things are stacked against them partly because of the law itself, partly because of the resources and the ecosystem, which people like Thomson Reuters and CAP are trying to address, but I think it's hard.
So sorry, I'm going to lean left.
Well, I'm not surprised.
No, I think, I just want to reiterate quickly two of the points made. One is that this ease of business point that Richa made. Has anyone talked about ease of doing business for NGO? Actually, let's be frank, it's gone the other way. So it's almost the burden of proof is ulta, that you prove that you are good guys because 99% of you are bad guys. So I think it is definitely more difficult. And the other two, just to be very clear, is this plethora of laws which Naushir, of course, knows in his sleep. If you recollect, all of them apply to the NGO part, but all of them don't apply to the corporate part. So all the corporate part NGOs have to comply with, all your tax, etc. But the FCRA and the trust part, they don't have to comply with. So I think it is more difficult. And the last one I wanted to highlight, very good point that Gaurang made, is we talked about the statutory or external, the regulations, which in itself are draconian. And then you have in the new world today, investors who almost, if not weekly, certainly monthly monitor you. Now, there again, for an NGO to be monitored like that is, as Meher said, the impact assessment report. I dare say if you asked the other mayor, she'd probably jump the guy and send him out. But that was the old world. Today, everyone has to do all this paperwork. And for an NGO, I think that is extremely taxing. I hope you have some good arguments.
Good arguments? Well, unfortunately, I can't have a good argument with the lawyer and the legal panel here. However, I'm going to make a couple of observations, right? So my wife has a kitty party group that she goes to once a month. And from what I understand is that, these 10 ladies sit around the lunch table and they complain about their mother-in-laws. And, basically say, oh, my mother-in-law did this, you can't imagine what she did that, blah, blah, blah. Then my wife comes back home and says, I don't understand this. Shalini is complaining about her mother-in-law so much, but I've met Auntie, she's such a nice lady. So and the funny thing is that every one of these ladies like everybody else's mother-in-law except their own. So like the corporate and the NGO space, everybody's got their own pain, and they assume the other person has it easy. So let me sort of talk a bit about the corporate side a bit, right? And this actually really came out to me because my own company, we actually have raised money from external investors in the last 1 year or so. And so prior to that, we were a private limited company, education, and we were doing our own work and doing as much compliance as we could. However, the minute an external investor came on board, he immediately sort of went through our accounts with a fine-tooth comb, everything possibly that could go wrong, he made sure that we complied with, we had company secretary, blah, blah. Now, the thing is that when you are, let's say, a non-profit, right? For example, like, let's say once you've got your FCRA and other things in place, and then the government has, let's say, benign neglect, and let's say once a year, a couple of times, you make sure that things are going. I know I'm getting some looks. But the thing is that imagine living with an investor who every week will check what's happening because his investor is concerned that he's going to lose his money. Because your success, his return is based on your success. And he has to make sure that you dot the I's, cross the T's, and he's constantly on your case. Like my friend with his divorce lawyer wife. You're living with that person. So one is the government, which is once in a while, but this is a person who's actually on your case. And as you become a bigger and bigger corporate, that level of compliance gets more and more. That's one side. Let's talk about HR compliance. Now the thing is, and I'm sure a lot of you have probably, let's say, experienced this, is that because you guys, a lot of you are in the non-profit space, you have a great vision. You have a great cause to rally people around. And the great thing about rallying people around a great cause is that you don't have to pay them as much as you normally would have to if you had to hire them in the corporate world. Because imagine if you're running a chemicals company or running, let's say, a company that manufactures shoes. What cause are you going to rally people around? So therefore, you have to make sure your talent is very well paid. And it's not just in terms of the money, but also in terms of the HR compliance. Make sure that all your policies are in place. Make sure your insurance is up to date, PPAs, all that stuff. Because the problem is that even if the government doesn't come down your head, your talent is going to leave unless you're HR compliant. And therefore, you have a bigger problem because when talent leaves, you are stuck and you have to pay other people more money. So, like I said, our mother-in-law is also not that easy.
I'll agree with Khil that basically, he mentioned about the investor checking and very thoroughly the books of accounts and all those things. But that could be sometimes after but now there's this new thing of new due diligence. And fortunately or otherwise, we have lots of multinational funders. And therefore, one of the big four has to land in the office every fortnight. For same due diligence, they will go through the same rigmarole every now and then. But it's something which we have to go through, and there is no other way. So, and in a way, of course, it is good, it keeps us also on the tenterhooks.
Yeah, may I just supplement that? And I think that's a great point that, an external source like that, which is an investor, kind of keeps you on your toes, keeps you honest, and so on. May I just say that for NGOs, there are several, similar sources. So again, like funders, they will probably have a much harder sort of evaluation process for an NGO, actually, and will also keep it, much harder for them on an ongoing basis because, the previous panel talked about return on investment. There is a return on investment for a financial investor. For someone who's giving you money, they are worried about a range of other things. They will ask you impact, which is so intangible and so difficult to demonstrate for an NGO, and multiple bottom line, which is this fancy new phrase that NGOs need to comply with. So, are you environmentally sustainable? Are you, socially sustainable? Are you also financially sustainable? Because you may be a not-for-profit, but you still need to make sure that your unit cost is, not too high and so on. So, the external pressures as well as the legal environment keep NGOs honest in several ways as well.
Just a quick point on that, and I think that's great that one of the things that NGOs really need to do is ask funders for money to hire someone to work on their compliance. And most funders get that. You know, mostly when we put in funding proposals, we put in a funding proposal only for the program. And, you know, for, you know, just the cost related to that. But there are operational costs, and all the funders recognize that this is important, so ask for the funding for that. And sorry, just on Akhil's point on talent, I think that is so important, you know. I mean, just in terms of retaining talent, over the last 10 years that I've worked in the NGO sector, I have so many friends who call me up and say, hey, Urvashi, I'm in a really stressful corporate life. I want to move to the chilled NGO world. I'm sure everybody's got this, right? But, I mean, because everybody thinks that you walk into an NGO and it's going to be chill, there's going to be no rules, there's not really going to be that much work. Little do they know that we work a lot harder, especially on Saturdays at 7 o'clock. And, you know, if you create those HR policies, you will retain talent, and you will retain good talent, and you will attract them. So, it goes beyond just funding also.
So now that we have such a unbiased group, we'll have a show of hands. Narika will vote for the corporates and all of us. No, but jokes aside, I think it's a good time. I'll keep my promise and open it up for Q&A. Any comments, any questions, please.
You want a mic? Just take one.
Could you elaborate a little bit about impact investing funds or social VC, social PE funds, and how has the legal structuring for that been done in the recent years? Because that's a very new field and not too much research has been published around that.
Yeah, so is this working? Yeah. Okay, so this is what Richa talked about, the double or triple bottom line now, where it is a little bit about money. So the return on investment can even be high single digits and not the crazy investment that some corporates need. And it also needs impact and changing lives. So that's the concept. It's also, of course, therefore, much more patient capital. It's not going to be looking at 2-3 years. It'll always have a much longer time horizon. And in terms of legal structure, it is for profit. So it will be, you know, the normal, usually private limited company. If it needs to be public, then public. I mean, there are now some pretty large enterprises that started with impact funding and now have grown, you know, LabourNet, Arvind, lots of them. So, and I think we do, both of us definitely see more and more of those, and usually they do an excellent job. But they will need, you know, the fact of life is, jokes aside, the due diligence and that non-stop monitoring. The minute you get someone else's money, whether your profit or your NGO, you will have that oversight. It's just that in the corporate world, you are also about money. So you should be watching the bottom line. In the NGOs, sometimes they are not so concerned with that. So for them, it's a different mindset.
So just adding on to Behram's point, is that one thing that, and again, this is from my experience in raising money for our education fund, because a lot of people who funded this fund are developed financial institutions from, you know, sovereign funds. And for them, because education ticks a box, right? So then it looks good to them. But the problem is that with measuring impact, there's no standard. I mean, they've tried to create standard, but it's very difficult to compare, let's say, if I'm, let's say, funding an old age home versus I'm doing, let's say, advocacy for women's rights. How do you compare the two if I've got, let's say, $1,000 to put in? So there's no standard, even within, let's say, sectors. Like, let's say, for example, even if I compare people doing education in the education sector, how do I compare, let's say, what's happening with, let's say, a non-profit school helping the poor versus, let's say, someone who's doing skilling for the underprivileged? Very difficult to do. So what generally happens, and I've seen this, is unfortunate, even though they say we talk about the triple bottom line or double bottom line, a lot of the DFIs still want those high quality returns. And they, I mean, even though they say we have you double digit or single digit, they still want return just marginally less than the classic vulture capitalists. So the thing is that even when you're looking at impact investment, I think the impact for them is more on their profit margin more than anything else.
I think try and keep the impact as specific as possible. I think Nirika had some suggestions, others also spoke. So I have seen where certainly then again as lawyers, we would keep the impact as objective as possible. If you're looking like for education and saying you want people to go all the way and not stop at 6th standard, then you do the maths on how many students used to go all the way to 12th and how many are now going, and if there are more, then there has been an impact. Now, quality again, it's tough. I mean, were they getting higher marks? Were they doing better in maths? But at least if the dropout rate was X and now it is X plus Y, there's clearly been an impact. Sorry.
I just wanted to address you the earlier comments or misnomers about the HR in the development sector. First, it's not chilled. Anyone who thinks it's chilled, I invite any of these HR leaders here, come and sit on their chairs. I know for a fact Manju's role, I know for a fact few of others, and it's an open challenge. Manage it for one day and then we understand how chilled that is. Number one misnomer. I know you don't think that we've interacted before. I'm just saying that that's the crucial part.
Who thought it was chilled?
No, there were calls that she was receiving from her colleagues saying about the chilled out NGO jobs. So the sabbatical jobs. So first of all, it's not that. Number two, finding HR at low cost in NGOs.
It's also changing.
It's more than changing. It exists because there's no funding. So the level of talent, the level of retention is much lower at times, else unless it's passion driven. I don't agree to the fact that NGO leaders are ready to work at less. I myself would not. That's the reason I shifted to a corporate life so that I could make the ends meet in the way I wanted but do the NGO work. So the fact there is NGO pay scales are less because we as funders don't realize that we need to pay the same cost that we need to pay to have good talent in my job. I cannot have a CEO working at 50K for an NGO working with 50,000 students, while a company which employs 1,500, the CEO gets paid at a different level. They might not be matched, but can we define as funders what is the parity and where are we ready to put in? So I think there were two clear misnomers that I thought were coming in that, so sorry to jump in there.
I agree with you, but if Naushir was answering this question, what he would say is that the priority has to be different. So it has to be fair, no doubt about that. And I think it's a great thing that that change has happened. But if your first priority is getting as much money as possible, then I don't think you fit into the NGO world, that's all.
So just want to address your point, because I've hired people for the non-profit space and the for-profit space. So I don't know if a lot of you know this, there was actually a Gartner report that came out, and they said that they analyzed what's the most important thing for people in their jobs. They said, what are the priorities, right? And interestingly, salary came forth. The first thing was let's say the opportunity to learn something new, self-development. Secondly was the opportunity, the second thing was a meaningful role. Yes. That means something, do I believe in what I'm doing? And this is actually getting more and more important, especially with millennials. Third, I think, was also opportunities for investment. Fourth was salary. So what I believe is that as long as you're paying a fair rate, yeah. All right, fair rate enough to have a decent life, not necessarily enough to buy the BMW 7 Series, but enough to buy, let's say, maybe a Skoda, right? The point is, once you've got that covered, then after that, the other stuff becomes more important. And again, in the non-profit space, it's easier. Sorry, I don't have a Skoda or a BMW either.
No, okay, I actually, sorry, I'm really sorry. I know we're running out of time. I just want to say, you're absolutely right. And a few days ago, someone said to me that for this generation, all that matters is money. And I'm so glad you've reinforced the point that it's not. But sadly for NGOs, the scrutiny on salaries is just so high by their funders. It's really unfortunate. They're really judged if they pay their staff reasonably well. And that's why, I mean, other than the meaningfulness and so on, just in the days of inflation and so on, it's just very hard to get good and retain, get and retain good quality talent.
I wanted to take issue immediately with Urvashi, with what you said right at the start, and I only hope that you were saying it from a debating point of view. I hope it was, and I don't remember your exact words, but this is something that we are often faced with, not usually from lawyers, but quite often from the corporate sector and from funders, that NGOs really don't take these things seriously. I mean, I think all of us, and I say it very passionately, take compliance, trying to do the right thing, trying to abide by the laws very seriously. But often it is extremely difficult, especially for small and medium-sized NGOs, to even know what the law is in the first place. I'll give you a small example. The Charity Commissioner, in its wisdom, has something called a change report, which we're all familiar under it. Now, I thought for many, many years that a change report had to be filed when you made a change. Only to learn about 10 years later that a change report has to be filed every year, whether or not you make a change. So we have broken a rule of the Charity Commissioner, which took weeks and months of continued visits back and forward, filling in forms, Xerox copies of this, that, and the attested copies, stamps put by this person, signatures by that person, to clear up something that we didn't know about in the first place. And this happens time and again. Recently, you talked about policies. You know, have all your policies in place. I actually Googled to find out how many policies we were meant to have, and I think it was the FMS website that said 27 different policies. I remember laughing years ago when I first heard about a board rotation policy. What the hell is a board rotation policy? But now we have to have a compliance policy for this, that, and the other, never mind HR, finance, child protection, investment, finance, this, that, and the other. I don't even know how long the list is. And I know that we've now got about 12 policies in place, and I think there are more, you know, that maybe we should be doing. So I think of all the sessions we've had today, I think the legal one is the one that is most challenging maybe for NGOs. We only know we've done something wrong when we've done it wrong, but only people like CAP help us to keep to the right path, but not proactively enough. We only come to him when we think when we know that we've done something wrong, because we don't know we've done it wrong in the first place.
No, but jokes aside, as Urvashi's lawyer, hand on heart, we are too scared of Mayor, and she said make it debating and provocative, so she was forced to make this statement.
Okay,
so,
okay.
You know, you should give a...
Richari Urvashi is helping NGOs all the time. Sorry.
Can I just add one thing to what Annabelle said just now? To add to all these miseries is the ambivalence about the interpretation of certain laws in the government itself. For example, is shops and establishment applicable to us? One does not know. After much debate internally, including an opinion from Shanin and everything, we took registration in that. We were granted that. Next year we went for renewal, and they told us, why have you come to us? You don't require this. So after some correspondence with them, we did not renew it. That's it. So, I mean, nobody's certain about certain laws. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, eminent lawyers are sitting here, and my question is to all of you. When we are talking about compliance, we are talking about compliance for the corporates, and we are talking about compliance for the NGO sector. What about compliance for the government? Do they have any accountability towards us, the taxpayers? We are talking about compliance. We are having this session, and I would agree with ma'am. For corporates, it is Ministry of Company Affairs. For NGOs, it is poor chap Charity Commissioner. I don't know what is happening in other states, but in Gujarat, the fellow charges 2% of the thing that you have received, or 50,000 rupees from each NGO every year. I don't know what happens to that money. How do I get it? If I go for an RTI, वो जल में रह के मगर से बैर वाली स्थिति हो जाएगी. ठीक है? Now I don't know how to deal with it. Yeah.
So you know, there is common Bombay Public Trust Act which applies in Gujarat and Maharashtra. In Gujarat, every trust is supposed to pay this contribution to the charity commissioner to administer his department. Hang on, Beram. So Bombay has this and it's 5%. Then way back in the 80s, I think one of the Salvation Army had a case and 5% got reduced to 2%. Then somewhere in the early 2000s, two Jain brothers did a RTI application and they found, I think, roughly 33 crores over which the charity commissioner was sitting over. Because, you know, who's paying money? Siddhivinayak, Mahalakshmi Temple Trust, they are also all registered trusts. So thanks to that, there was a PIL. And now, since almost the last 10 years, Bombay, or rather Maharashtra, pays no contribution. But when this stay order was brought, overnight the charity commissioner's office had a state-of-the-art computer on every table. They centrally air-conditioned the whole building. But it's 33 crores, they can't spend it like that. But one day, it'll get over. And then they'll start charging you all over again.
Okay.
Small question. When you're a startup and you ask for things like shops and establishment, licenses, food license, all these things, you don't have a turnover. You don't. They ask you how many employees, how much turnover, all that. So how do you do all that? Basically, those who write project reports guide us into doing this kind of work? You see, basically, whenever we have an idea, we have something in our mind, we feel that this is what's going to happen, we project something. But when you go for a license to start this particular thing, you already are supposed to be implementing it and have some things in place, like how many employees, what's your turnover at the moment, and how will you look at it in future. So I know maybe I'm a rookie at asking. I mean, this question seems to be very elementary, but I am in a very early stage in my development, so that's the reason why I'm asking this question.
No, it's a very good question.
I'm not sure if it's a trust law project, but I think it's an unlimited project.
Trust implementing certain projects, want to implement certain projects.
So definitely, I think when you're in an early stage, incubators are a great way to go. There are a number of incubators that sort of help you sort of think through these things to the point that you can actually access some of the resources that are out there. So you can definitely access trust law to get you a lawyer to sort of help you think through these things. But I would also say look at some of the incubators and also sort of, Unlimited is a great one. There are a couple of other ones that, the Thai startups, etc., that will help you sort of think through this. Sorry?
Yeah. I am Ahmedabad, I think, has them.
I am Ahmedabad has them. Yeah, exactly. But yeah. Yeah.
Am I allowed for one more question? Please. Yeah. Okay, so this is just taking the corporate versus NGO debate a little ahead. So we actually have like a 15 crore budget this year, and because of the CSR scenario, actually our funding has been changed to like almost 70-80% CSR funding vis-a-vis a 10 or a 15% funding 5 years back, okay? Now, when we do that, we have like, since there are like programs which are running over 3 years, we have like multiple funder projects, and due to this, we have been bombarded with multiple MOUs, which are like 1-year MOUs. So the problem which we face are like, the funders have a fixed MOU template and they expect us to sign without actually debating on these conditions or the MOU terms and conditions. And when we go back to them saying that, no, we don't want to accept this indemnity clause, we are often being told that the others have signed it. What problem do you have signing it? So I don't know whether you all have come across such cases and how do you actually deal with it? Because actually, I'm now looking at having a template to track all those 40-50 MOUs which we have executed and ensuring that we comply to it and actually review it through a legal help every month so that we ensure that we take an indemnity, and I'm actually exploring indemnity insurance, the directors and officers liability insurance and all those things, and I'm not sure any other NGO has taken it, and I would like you to shed some light on that.
So we can definitely help you with that. like I said, we work with about 50 plus law firms in India, and the law firms are very willing to help with that. And MOUs are really something that you should look. Don't sign anything without having a lawyer check it out in your favor. So, but
we do have a lawyer who checks it, but most of the times we are being told that no, but this is something which is not negotiable. And so we do try to see as far as possible that there are conditions where you are governed under the Mumbai jurisdiction. Because we can't go to Bangalore, then we insist that it should be Mumbai jurisdiction. But because the funder is based in Bangalore, we are actually told to accept those clauses. So how do you actually get into this negotiation? Is where with some funders we are managing to do that, but most of them actually do not agree to it. Even though you have a legal, the lawyer will say this is not acceptable, but at the end of it, you need to convince the lawyer at the other end as well. So how do you make that balance?
Can I try to answer that? First thing is that go by your gut feeling in that and don't involve too many lawyers. For example, the long-term partnership with that funder should matter more than specific clauses. Yes, there are difficulties, I understand that. There are some of the clauses which I would call them boilerplate clauses, which are just there, so we have to live with it. I remember we had these arguments with one of the big German car maker. We had agreement with them, that was the first one, and they wanted our chairman to sign on certain papers, which, as I was against, our CEO was against, but then eventually we thought that this is going to be a long-term partnership, and it doesn't matter, we'll sign it. It had an exclusivity clause that we will never work with any other automobile manufacturer in any geography of the world, even automobile parts, nothing at all. Down the line, 3-4 years later, we had opportunity to work with another, again a German car maker, and we approached them and they relaxed it. So that's what I'm saying. Go by the relationship potential more than the exact clauses.
That's a great answer, and I'm just going to very briefly supplement that. The problem that you identified is something that actually even the commercial world faces. So if you're taking money from an investor or from a bank, they will say, just sign, just sign where we're saying. There's no question of any negotiation. But that said, I think it is possible to demonstrate to them how hard it will be for you to comply with certain of those covenants. And I have as well negotiated some indemnity clauses on behalf of NGOs to say that if you're asking me to indemnify to an unlimited extent, you can see what my balance sheet is like. I can't possibly indemnify you for, costs and charges and, penal damages and so on. So usually, you should try and limit that to the extent of the donation. And I found that funders do respond to those kinds of things. So I think it is possible, given the kind of relationship you may have with your funders, to kind of get them to empathize with what your situation is and to budge on what their requirements are.
So just from a practical point of view, right? So the thing is that, for example, for our education fund, we raise funds from ultra-high net worth individuals right up to the DFIs. Now the thing is that what you need to look at as a non-profit is that what are your funding channels? So the thing is, very often, if you choose to exclusively deal with, let's say, international funding agencies, or let's say, therefore you will have to deal with compliance. But then if you say that's the only source of funds I have, then you have to live with it. Conversely, if you say that maybe I don't want to live with this compliance as much, I want to start looking at other funding channels, like again, ultra-high net worth individuals. And again, there are a lot of them out there. It's just that they're less prominent than the big agencies. However, what I do believe, and this is what I've done even for my own company, is that I've actually gone after a lot of those people, and I've realized that it's actually not to say it's the right thing or the wrong thing, but the point is that most ultra-high net worth individuals tend to want to fund you because of the passion part and because they believe in the cause. They won't get involved in all the legal compliance and things like that. So I think what you should really think at is that you say that if you can't deal with all these MOUs, then start looking at alternative funding options. There are others out there. Take a call.
In the CSR space, these are absolutely inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the last thing I can say, I think Gaurang put it very well, take a practical view, and to give you very non-legal advice, lawyers love indemnities, but in the world we live in India especially, an indemnity means what? They sue you. And you go to court, how long does it take? So who cares? Take a practical view. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.